All right, so my name is Brian Ju. I'm a current computer science student at the University of Maryland. I am currently interning at Amazon, and I'm also a previous software engineering intern at Capital One. So my goal with these videos is to create quality, informative content that current and upcoming CS students can learn from. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm going to be mixing some jokes and shit posting in there. That's just kind of how my sense of humor is. It's a very dry humor that grows on, I would say most people, but if it's not your cup of tea, that's okay. Anyways, enough about me. We have a guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Aiden?
Yeah, so my name is Aiden, and I am a computer science student. I go to school in the Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, and I also do some CS content on TikTok. Yeah.
Very cool. So the format of this is first we're going to go through a technical question that I was asked at a real Big N interview. It was not a FANG company, but it was up there. And then the second is going to be a behavioral question. I was asked at, I think, another Big N company, but I've actually been asked it multiple times, just worded differently. And then next, we're going to go over time if Aiden has any questions for me, and then I'm going to share any immediate feedback or advice that I have for people in this position. So first, I'm going to pull up an interactive IDE here, and here it is. I encourage you to ask any questions, by the way, about any ambiguity that you have. Would you like me to read this out loud, or do you want to read it yourself silently? Okay. Yeah, so you're given a list of lists, think like a 2D array, right? Each representing a voting ballot, so to speak. These ballots each have 3 votes in the form of names or strings, with index 0 being worth 3 points, the thing or name in index 1 being worth 2 points, and index 2 being worth 1 point. So from this list of lists, we want you to return a list of voting candidate names sorted from most to least points. What is going to be valid, though? You don't have to deal with some like invalid, like ballot's the wrong size or the whole thing is null.
So pretty much what I was thinking was immediately I thought of a hash map that would store the points, the amount of votes that a person had, or the amount of points that person had, to the name. And I think that's all I was thinking. So I created a default dict where the default value is an int. And once I created this hash map, I explained what I wanted the keys and values to be. I thought that was important to let Brian know. I wanted him to know that I was going to set the names as the key and the amount of points that they had as the value. My thought process for this was to loop through every single one of the votes. And then I was explaining my thought process before proceeding with coding. So I was explaining that I wanted to loop through each of the votes and deconstruct each of the arrays. First, I clarified that there is only 3 people in every array, so I could confirm that my deconstruction would work. And he verified that it would only be 3, so when I code, I'm going to be deconstructing every vote into 3 different parts, best, second best, and worst, to keep track of those 3 different elements of the vote array. And for the best, the best is going to be the name of the best vote, so I fed that as the key and added 3 to it. And you could just add 3 since it's a default dict. All of the default values are going to be set to 0, so I could just add to it without checking to see if it's in the dictionary. Then for second best I add 2, and then the worst I add 1. So here I'm doing a little thing where I'm setting the key to hashmap.get. This allows the dictionary to be sorted by the value instead of by the key.
I don't know if you can do it in this IDE. I get what you're going for, but I think you're on the right track with the sorted. But do you actually need to sort the map itself, considering what you're supposed to be returning?
So Brian asked a really good question here, and it helps me pinpoint the right solution. So the mistake that I made was I sorted the hash map, like the entire hash map, instead of just sorting the values of the hash map, which would be the names, since the output is just the name for the candidates that are receiving. Eventually I figure it out, where I only have to use hashmap.keys.
Right.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
I name it candidates just for readability and return that candidates sorted array.
Right now, if two people are tied, there's no real tiebreaker that's implemented, right? I want you to implement a tiebreaker based off the amount of first place votes specifically.
Right now, I'm having a little bit of trouble because it was a good follow-up question. I wasn't too sure how I was going to do it. What I did know was I wanted to store the amount of first votes that each person had.
Tiebreaker we want to implement is just the first place votes, and if they're still tied after that, we can just call it a draw.
Pretty much what I wanted to clarify was first if we were only doing tiebreakers for first place. And now I'm going to be explaining two different routes that I wanted to take. So the first route that I wanted to take was using a second default dict.
Creating your own class for the ballots, but you don't have to do that. But either one would be fine, honestly. But if whichever one, I guess, is simpler for you to implement, because in the scope of this problem, it's not going to be that big of a deal as long as you understand the trade-offs.
At this point, I chose the two default dictionary approach, where I had two separate dictionaries because I thought that'd be a lot simpler. So I implemented this. I just added a second default dictionary and I called it first place votes or something like that. And then whenever a person had the best, or whenever there is a best name, I used that name as the key, the best variable, and then I added 1 to it in the for loop as we loop through the votes. And you can see I explained what the default dictionary was doing for the first place votes as well, even though it's pretty obvious. At this point, I was having trouble figuring out how to sort the names by their first place votes after sorting by the amount of total votes that they got. My thought process was...
Well, right now, there's two things. One is you forgot to rename hash map.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep. And the second is, so are you sure that your first place votes default dict would get at least initialized with all the names correctly, the way you have it right now?
Actually proved him wrong here, because I am sure, because it initializes to 0, and I explained this.
Yep.
So I communicated him my thought process, which he corrected later. I was thinking, how could I sort the array after sorting it by the keys, or the values, sorry, and then sorting it after by the first place votes. So at this point, I had like a max votes counter that stored the max votes that someone had, and then I wanted to loop through the names and checked if they were also in first place, like checking for a tie. Brian let me go on for a little bit with this, because, you know, he wanted to see if it'll lead somewhere, but eventually found that I wasn't going anywhere. So I think at this point, I was just talking through what I was trying to do for both Brian and myself, because I also didn't really know what I was doing.
You're still going to be returning the list of candidates.
At this point, I was giving filler questions because I was very lost. But I found the light soon, so.
It's a bit unnecessary. So when you think about it, right? So before, what are you doing? You're sorting based on who's got the most total votes, right? And essentially, you can think of your tiebreaker now for first place votes as a secondary sort, right? So if you think about it, if you apply the secondary sort and then you apply the primary sort, isn't that it? You can just return the list then.
Thanks, Brian.
Do you happen to know what the time and space complexity of this algorithm would be?
So I think I got this right, actually. I explained that I loop through the votes one time, so that'd be n. And then when I sort it, it's two sorts. So I guess it's like 2 log n, so technically it'd be a 2o or 2n log n. But I reduced it to o of n log n.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was right. And I thought that the space complexity, since we have two different dictionaries, which will at most store n values, that would be 2n,
okay.
But that reduces to n. So time complexity, n log n, space complexity, n. Thank you very much.
Yep. So I guess the next I'm going to give you a behavioral question, okay? All right, so the question is, so just tell me about the most important or complex technical project you've ever worked on. So just give me like, so I guess the rundown on it, and this can be from school, this can be from an internship, personal project, it doesn't really matter as long as you can talk about it.
So I knew immediately what I was going to talk about. I started talking about a resume rewriter that I made using OpenAI's API. So yeah, I talked about an OpenAI wrapper that I used for a front-end full-stack project, actually, because it included some API calls. So I talked about this project that I did. I started off really badly. Like, I didn't really... I wasn't thinking about the star method. So I was just explaining what the project was. I was explaining that I explained the problem that I was solving with my project first. So I was explaining the problem, which was, for most people when you're applying, I was really into the application process at this point in time. So I knew about things, the little tips that people gave me for applying, and like specifically the tip that I brought up was for resumes. So for resumes, you want keywords from the job description that you're applying to be in your resume. So the tool that I thought of was a resume rewriter, which you would feed your original resume, job title, and a job description, and then it would rewrite your resume to cater towards that job that you're applying to. Pretty much I explained that, and then I got into the STAR method. I laid out the situation, I highlighted the task after, and then I explained the action, because I pretty much did the S&T. The action that I took was okay, I didn't go over the tech part. So the task that I had was I didn't really understand APIs, so I needed something to simplify the API process instead of using like a raw ChatGPT API. So the action that I took was I tackled it by looking for a ChatGPT wrapper, which would simplify the usage of the API, so that I can wrap my head around it and complete the project without biting at bricks the entire time. And the resolution was I created this tool. I used the LangChain library, which is a ChatGPT AI
I'm not
API
too
wrapper.
familiar myself with generative AI projects. I actually haven't used any of those APIs or anything like that. It's probably something I should do. I feel kind of like a boomer for not having done it. But yeah, just walk me through what, I guess, like the tech stack you use and what it sort of looks like under the hood.
So I'm going to continue my last answer my last question, because I think I can complete this in time. Anyways, I used the LangChain library to do the API calls for me. Not for me, but it made it simpler, and I was able to successfully complete my LangChain API project. So the tech stack that I used was, I used Next.js for front-end and back-end, because Next.js is a full-stack framework for React. I didn't want to use React because I am not really strong in back-end, so Next.js makes it a lot easier, because it contains an API folder where you handle all your API calls and stuff like that. So I explained why, or how I was using the framework and why I was using the framework. The why is really important, I think. So then I explained I used Tailwind for styling, and I explained what Tailwind was. It's an inline styler, so you didn't have to use CSS files. I pretty much explained like why I was using these tools. So Tailwind, I used Tailwinds because I didn't like working with CSS files. It allowed me to just do inline styling, which was a lot easier to me. And then I explained the usage of LangChain, the LangChain library, which simplified API calls for me, specifically for the OpenAI API. And I also explained that I didn't just use it in a way where I could avoid using API calls. I actually learned how to use API calls like post requests and get requests, stuff like that, using LangChain's library, because it didn't take away everything. I still was able to learn some stuff without having to be stuck for like 1 month, 2 months, learning how to use raw API calls and stuff like that.
Okay, so next I guess I'll just go into the feedback. I don't actually have a ton. I think you performed very well on this. If I was interviewing you, I probably would have passed you. That being said, take my advice with a grain, or take that with a grain of salt, because I am not interviewing people, so it does not come out to me. I guess I only really have 2 things. So the first thing is you did a very good job during the technical part of explaining what you were going to do, and not necessarily pseudocoding, but kind of detailing the approach you're going to take. before diving into the problem. I think that's something that a lot of younger people struggle with, where they just want to kind of jump straight in as opposed to thinking about how you're going to tackle the problem. What I would say is, even after you've started, like for example, when I gave you the follow-up, you can take more time to, I guess, like think about it again, right? Because they are essentially giving you not an entirely new problem, but they're adding a good amount onto it. And I don't know any interviewer that's ever gotten impatient from taking, more time to pseudocode to scope it out. And I guess like later in the problem, if you need a refocus, you realize, oh, I've been doing it wrong, or if you get a follow-up, it's also fine to do that. It's the first thing. And the second thing is, it's not necessarily something you did wrong, but it's generally speaking, when an interviewer is going to give you a behavioral question, like tell me about this time, tell you about a project, you want to keep the first part concise, because typically they're going to be asking follow-ups on it, and they're going to be sort of probing you, not necessarily interrupting you, but finding like when you're stalling in what you're saying, then they're going to ask the follow-up. So for example, if you've got like the equivalent of 5 paragraphs of text that you're going to say as like your response, you can open it with 2, and then most likely the next 2 or 3 will come out from the follow-ups. Yeah. But it's not necessarily something you did bad. It's just, I think, typically that helps the conversation flow better. But again, not wrong. But in general, it's a very good star response. I don't know if you actively think about doing that, or if that was just more of a subconscious thing, but that was good. But yeah, that's what I have. Do you have any questions for me? Yeah, I think you can always say that, like, hey, can I have a minute? And as long as it is kind of like anywhere from like a couple seconds to a minute, you should be fine. If you take like a 5-minute pause, that may be a problem, but taking some time is never an issue. But as for like behavioral questions that really stumped me, okay, this is probably not a good thing to admit, but no, it's all good. I'm going to elaborate on it, but I am someone that's in some instances, I'm not proud of this, I can package some bullshit in some really nice sounding way, right? I've had a couple previous projects from internships or whatever that I may not have actually, I may have made it to sound more impressive than it really was, and I may have thrown in some buzzwords in there. So generally, I'm good at saying, yeah, like I did this project, I used this tech stack, this was the front end, this was the back end, this is how it worked. But for one of my Amazon interviews, I'm not going to name the interviewer, he's a really chill guy, but he absolutely grilled, like, cause like I like talked about it in like surface level detail, and I had other interviewers that are like, oh, that sounds pretty cool, like very, very nicely done, like that right? But this guy grills me. He's like, oh, you used Angular and Node.js and SQLize. So how did those interact with each other? Like, how exactly did that work under the hood? And I didn't know how to explain it. But luckily for you, it sounds like you do a lot of personal projects. You've got things that you do know how to explain in good depth. Like, I don't know the most about Next.js, but it looks like, to me, that sounded pretty good, right? But yeah. No, I got probed really hard on something that I may have embellished a little bit, and that definitely blew up in my face. So it's not so much as the question as much it was like the circumstance and the like asking more questions on that question. Okay, I guess like the first one I think that is generally applicable is to just get the basics down like really well in terms of like LeetCode, and not stress about your skill your freshman year. You're always going to find like Ouckah golds and plats that are like doing some absurd things like as a freshman or sophomore, right? And that's just not the norm, and you don't need to do that. I think as long as you have by the end of your sophomore year, right? If you can do BFS, DFS, hash map problems, 2-pointer, trees, linked lists, those type of things, if you can do all the easies for those by the end of your sophomore year, and you actually understand the data structures and the algos that you're working with there, like you're in good shape. Like too many people, I think, skip that step of understanding the easy stuff, and they do these mediums, but they're really just memorizing the problems, and that's not quite what you want to be doing, in my opinion. You may be able to get away with it. I don't think it's optimal, though. I think the next thing, though, is that a lot of people overlook is to ask thoughtful, impactful questions to your interviewer that make them think, right? Like your interviewer is going to get asked, how's the culture at this company? How do you like it, right? By literally everyone, right? But I think this is one of the ways that you can kind of stick out a little bit to your interviewer. Like, for example, like one question that I used to ask a lot, I would always get like told like, oh, that's like a really good question, or then would really put them in the think tank would be, what is a part of your team's dev or planning process that you would do differently if it were up to you? Because I typically get interviewed by these junior mid-level engineers, and they're usually not in charge of those things. So they'd always tell me about, like, I hate the way we're doing sprint planning, or like, I don't like this about our CR process. So things like that, I think, definitely make your interviewer think. And you can take that question verbatim if you want, but you can also just take, I would say, like 20 minutes before your interview just to think of like one or two like cool questions. Once again, I apologize for screwing up the audio. That's something I will have situated with QuickTime and my audio settings in the future. But yeah, let me know if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. I definitely enjoyed recording it, even if that screwed up and it's going to be voiced over. Yeah, I thoroughly had fun recording this, and if you guys want to see more content like this in the future, let me know. I can also make different stuff, kind of like professional related, kind of, I guess, like office hours type of thing. But yeah, let me know what type of content you'd like to see in the future, and that's all I have for